Folks who burn that firewood are stakeholders. And she's absolutely right. I mean, every person who breathes that clean air that our forests provide and drinks that water and enjoys the products are our stakeholders. And we have to keep looking for better ways to communicate to them all about the importance of our forests and forest products. And I know we're going to hear about that from both Christine and Mara. So, sure. Would you like to start?
Yeah, I'm going to just come up here so I can see my slides. Let's see. Can you all hear me without the mic, or do I need to do the mic? I hear you. Yeah. Okay. How's that? Can you guys hear? No? Oh, here it is. Okay. All right, we're in good shape. So what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about a project that the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and the Working Lands Enterprise Board's Forestry Committee and our trade partners worked on this past fall. It was a survey of Vermonters and visitors. And the purpose of that survey was to really understand the perceptions, the current perceptions of both Vermonters and visitors to Vermont of our forests and the products that come out of our forests. I think in the past, there's probably been some research on that, but it hadn't been updated in a bit. So we thought, let's update that information so that we're all clear on what people think and feel about this industry and both the resource that it's stewarding and utilizing, but also then those products that people are using and enjoying in their homes and everywhere else. So what we did, we put together a committee that developed a survey. We hired a consultant with a good background in this, and essentially what we did was we put it out, and some of you may have actually taken the survey. This was an opt-in, internet-based survey. We sent it out on email. Our trade partners in the industry sent it out to their lists, but more so, we really encourage people to have your friends and family take it. Not necessarily people who work in a mill or are an actual logger, but maybe you've got a cousin who's not part of the industry. We really wanted to understand what people outside the industry think and believe about our forests and the products that come out of them. So we got 1,900 plus responses, which is really great. Over 1,000 completed surveys, 1,500 Vermonters and second homeowners, about 400 plus who are out of state, which were either visitors or former residents. And we did this between November 16th and December 27th of 2017. So this is basically what it looks like in terms of where people were. So obviously we had a great representation from throughout Vermont. And we also, just kind of pulling it out, it was primarily New England, Northeast, because that's kind of, I think, the networks of people. But we were really trying to reach a couple of people on the committee had good connections with the recreation industry, and so we really asked them to put it out because we wanted to get to those environmentalists or outdoor enthusiasts, recreationists who are using the forest. We really wanted to get them and their perceptions into this survey. And so the good news is, we really did. And of course, it's not surprising that most of our surveys did come from the Northeast, but we did have a spattering of people. In fact, all the way up to Alaska, we had somebody who I suspect might be Paul Frederick's daughter. But anyway, so it was, I guess I share that just so you know that this was a pretty robust survey. While not scientifically or statistically, validated, we have so much data, we feel very, very comfortable with what we got back. So the findings, first of all, we asked what people's, describe their involvement with the various aspects of our forests and the industry itself. So I just put these in order. So outdoor recreation was big, which was great. We really wanted to reach that audience. People who care about environmental causes, people who care about wildlife conservation, the locavore movement, people who are involved in woodlot management, maybe landowners or others that are involved in that, people from within the industry, and woodworking. So I think we captured a lot of people both within, but also really, more importantly, from outside of the industry to really understand what perceptions are. So what we did, and what I'm going to show you next is really just, it's a kind of a word cloud, but it gives you an idea. A lot of the questions we asked were open-ended purposely because we didn't want to feed people thoughts and ideas. We wanted to really gather what their thoughts and ideas were. So some of the words that came up when we asked them what their thoughts are about Vermont forests. These are the kinds of words that came out in most of the responses. So things like beautiful, wildlife, green, habitat, important, home, natural, really positive words, which was a good validation that people do in fact love our forests. We also asked the same about wood products, Vermont wood products. And so these are some of the words that really rose to the top. You see things like beautiful, sustainable, quality, unique, artisan, craft. These, again, very positive, and so a lot to work with in terms of what people think and believe when they think about Vermont wood products. So just those top lines again, just the words that really did rise to the top. Beautiful, green, peaceful, wildlife, quiet, diverse are some of the things people think about when they think about our forests. And for forest products, beautiful, quality, local, unique, natural, creative, these are the words that came to the top. And I share this because this is really helping us to understand what are people thinking, how are they feeling, what emotions are evoked in them. And so really what we found was that when thinking about our forests, people are really driven by this deep connection to nature, a spiritual connection, diverse habitat, pristineness, again, very positive emotional response to our forests. And those emotions really are a sense of peacefulness, feeling welcome, connected to the wild. Mysticism actually came up as a lot, and sacredness, which, to some of us in the industry might seem a little touchy-feely, but hang with me because there's actually a real opportunity in trying to capture a lot of those emotions in what we do. So for Vermont wood products, the same is true. People were driven by this idea of beautiful things from beautiful trees, artistic, craftspeople, design, craftsmanship. People really valued these sorts of things from this industry. And then again, the emotions at play are this gratitude, appreciation of beauty and design, the connection to Vermont, this sense of place, the relationship with trees and nature. Again, there's great opportunity in that to tap into that emotion. The admiration of the tradition that we have here with our woodcraft, and this pride and love. So the things that did come out as either being a bit of a conflict or perhaps misunderstanding. So the idea of forestry versus sustainability, that can hang people up sometimes. Harvesting versus logging. People, no big surprise to people in this room that people who are unfamiliar with the industry, if they go out and they see people cutting trees and they don't understand it, they tend to have a bit of a worrisome or negative reaction, again, because they don't understand it. This idea of conservation versus preservation, and this is not surprising. Myself coming from the conservation world, that was always a challenge, people not understanding how to conserve something. It's different from, say, historic preservation. And there's some nuances there that, unless you're deep in it, you don't necessarily understand. Forest management versus overreach, again, not surprising to folks in the room. I think that's often an area of conflict that needs to be overcome. Wood heat versus carbon emissions, and I think Maura will touch a little bit more on this in her presentation, but people not fully understanding the benefits of things like wood heat. Is it good or bad for the environment? You know, what does it do about our carbon footprint? There's still a lack of understanding there that I think there's some work to be done. And then forest use versus forest misuse. Again, this is, I think, for people who are not steeped in the industry itself and don't truly understand forest management, they see the forest, they don't necessarily understand what it takes to keep that forest as a healthy and productive forest and what that really means. So there's opportunity in all of that. So one of the recommendations that I'm making out of this, because the word sustainable can hang some people up, not everybody, but sometimes that word can cause some debate. Yet the words, we tested the words healthy and productive, and what we found is those words put together were less misunderstood than sustainable. So my recommendation is when you're talking, and depending on who you're talking to, you can use the word sustainable. It's not like it's a bad word, but if you think that somebody might not understand what sustainable is, or that you might go down a rabbit hole of debating what sustainable actually is, using healthy and productive can actually help people to understand what is happening in our forests and what needs to happen in our forests without having to go through that kind of a debate. So it's really a call that any of you can make depending on your audience and depending on what you're doing, but that is one, it's a little less confusing to some people. So this is a big one. People do make decisions based on emotions and not facts. And so I guess I want to stress, and what this survey really did validate, is that when you're trying to reach people and you're trying to either convince them or educate them about the industry and what it is you do and your place in the industry, you have to remember that people do make their decisions based on emotions and not facts. So you can throw as many facts as you want, but it may not make a difference to somebody, and they may not want to change their mind. So the fact that people do think forests are sacred, mystical, alive, and beautiful, my recommendation to the industry and anybody who's working in it is don't shy away from that, because those are actually very powerful emotions. And frankly, I believe, and the people that I've met in this industry feel very similarly. I mean, people work in the woods because they love the woods. And there is this deep connection that I think pretty much everybody in this industry feels and knows, because you get to spend so much time out in our forests. So take advantage of that and find that as a common ground, so that when you're sharing your story, you can connect to people on that emotional level. Another recommendation that I have is to really focus on values. Again, when you're trying to tell your story, or you're working on a policy issue or something that's related to the forest, start from a place of shared values. Because again, knowing, as we validated in this survey, that so many people just have this deep connection and deep love of forests, remember that we do all share that. We may have different opinions on how we go about managing our forests, what the right policy decisions may be or may not be, but if we can start from that place of shared values, we can begin to have a conversation and really help to educate one another about what's needed to keep our forests as forests. And so to remember, who is your audience when you're thinking about whether you're trying to educate, quote unquote, the public, or just a sector of the public, or your customers, or people in your family or your neighborhood, depending on your situation. Really think about what is it that they care about, who is that audience, do they care about it when it comes to forests that they're not familiar? Maybe they do care a lot about recreation, they like to hike or they like to mountain bike. Maybe they love wildlife. I mean, there's a great connection to wildlife and protecting wildlife habitat through good forest management. So there's a really great common ground there. Same with the environment. I come from the environmental community. There are a lot of similarities, believe it or not, between people in this industry and people who, quote unquote, care about the environment. It is the way in which we talk to one another and help each other understand our perspective and where we're coming from, and what information will help people understand what's needed to protect our forests. So there is a way to have those conversations without it turning into a conflict. And of course, the local economy, a lot of people do care about that.
This industry is a perfect example of where we can have a thriving local economy, a forest-based economy in places like Burke, and you know, we are surrounded by it. So it's a wonderful example of where there are people who may not know the industry that well, but they understand the local economic impact. So that's a place to start, and that's a shared value that you can utilize. So again, some just suggestions. If somebody does care about things like recreation, you can talk about how forest management helps to create trail systems. If somebody cares deeply about wildlife, you can really talk a lot about forest management and how the benefits that forest management can have for wildlife, whether it's migratory songbirds or bear habitat, deer habitat, whatever it is that people particularly care about, there is a benefit to good forest management on wildlife. The environment, again, you've got environmentalists, and I think Maura will touch more on this, but our forests do supply a great amount of renewable energy. And so being able to talk to people, if that is what they care about, there is a lot of good that we can talk about when it comes to what our forests can provide in terms of renewable energy. And again, the local economy. When we're supporting the forest product supply chain, we are supporting local jobs. So I think the most important, recommendation that came out of this survey and the work that we're doing with the Vermont Forest Industry Network is really telling our story, telling the industry's story. And we have a lot of great stories to tell. The slideshow that was playing early this morning has some great photos that actually were taken by Erica, who's in the back over there. She's been going around to take photos that really exemplify various aspects of the supply chain. And in all of those, we've been working on different stories to try to introduce people to the businesses and the people behind these products and these services that our forests bring. So a lot of times we'll talk about, we'll get up to the big picture, and we want to say things like, and it's a really important fact, that our forest-based economy provides economic output of $3.4 billion, 20,000 jobs related to both forest products industry and recreation together. So the non-recreation is $1.4 billion and 10,500 jobs. It's a lot, it's an impactful industry. So we talk about that, but a lot of people don't really understand who are those people and what are those jobs? Because again, if you're not in that industry, you're kind of clueless to it. And so this is where I think the industry has a great opportunity to tell some of these stories. And how can we really evoke some of these emotional responses that we want to get? That, again, looking back at that survey, there's a lot of good fodder in there, a lot of great emotions that we want to tap into. So I'm going to just show you a few examples of the kinds of the people and the stories behind those people. So many of you may know Diana Frederick. She's a state land stewardship forester. And she, in this photo, is estimating the saw log height of a tree at Smuggler's Notch State Forest in Cambridge. And so Erica went out with her and her team and was, just going around trying to understand, what's the day in the life of a forester? And so Diana was really able to help us to understand, and what does it look like when you're out there doing this work? What does it really mean? Here's a familiar face. Colleen and her sons. Colleen with her sons Brian, Mark, and Doug at their White Cedar Sawmill in Albany. We did a story about their succession planning. That was a really good one because I think that's an issue that's a lot in the industry are facing. If we do know that this, as well as other industries in Vermont, are aging industries, and businesses have to have good succession plans. And I think Colleen has a great example with, her sons work actively in the business with her. And so when she decides to retire, she's leaving it in good hands. And so that was a great story to tell. And I have to tell you that story went gangbusters. We put it out on our website and shared it and asked many of you in the room to share it. And it has gone far and wide. And happy to say Colleen even did report she got several phone calls from out of state looking for cedar. So, when you promote businesses in the state, it can not just tell a good story, but sometimes it can even lead to some sales, which is great to hear. So here's somebody else who some of you may know, Heath Bunnell. He's, I think he lives locally, but he's a master logger. He's an avid mountain biker. And he did a timber harvest in the region that would preserve the integrity of the Dashney trails that are near the base of where we sit today at Burke Mountain. And I like this photo, and I loved the story that we were able to tell about sort of that connection between recreation and the industry here in Burke. Because Heath is somebody who, you know, yeah, he's a logger, but he's also a mountain biker. And I think sometimes we forget that we all have full lives. You know, we're not just one thing. I'm not just a communications person. You know, I'm a gardener, and I'm a skier, and all of us in this room have we have lots of things in our life that is, we're not defined by what we do for our day job. And so to me, this was just a good example of where, oftentimes we think that recreationists versus loggers, and it's really not the case. And Heath is a good example of that. So this is Noah Burke. He's preparing to load some wood into a CNC router, and this is at Vermont Farm Table. This is a company that's really in a growth stage, which is exciting to see. And I liked this one too, because I think we often think of the craftsmanship in Vermont, but I also think that there's an opportunity to tell a story about technology and how that is actually a way of the future for our wood products industry. Not everybody is, sort of in the back with a hand tool making wood products. There are actually companies out there, many of them, that are really larger companies that are actually using pretty high-tech machinery to make beautiful wood products. And this is just one example. So for young people in particular who may not understand that, hey, if they want to go into high-tech, they can still be in this industry and be in high-tech. So it's pretty cool. So here's one of the examples of where, we know that sometimes there's a tension and a conflict between people who love our forests and they don't understand logging and the purpose of logging and the benefit that it can bring to the forest. And really that logging actually can have a very high benefit to wildlife habitat. And so this is Dan and Pat Stone, and Kathleen was able to connect us with the Stones. They have a woodlot down in Wallingford, and they're conducting a timber harvest to improve habitat for migratory songbirds that breed in their forest. And it's a really cool project, and maybe Kathleen, you can talk a little bit more about it later, but it's the Woods Wildlife and Warblers program. And so we were able to capture some of this and show just the benefit of a logging job. And so this is Thad Premsky, and he's the logger working on the Stone property harvest. And I have a little asterisk here because I remember when Erica went out and she was taking photos, she was chatting with Thad, and he mentioned that he's a dad to 3 kids and a dog named Bingo. And I think the story went that when his wife was about to have their 3rd child, their younger one at the time said, well, I think we should name it Bingo. And he said, well, I'm not sure we'll do that, but maybe we can just get a dog named Bingo. So he now has 3 kids and a dog named Bingo. But I share that because, just in the short time that Erica had with Thad, she was able to talk with him on a different level than just here I am a logger. But he's also got a family, and so there's we all have common values and commonalities amongst us that if we stop to get to know one another, we can learn a lot more, and we all have very interesting backgrounds and stories to tell. So this is Mike Burke. He works at Vermont Wood Pellet Company in North Clarendon, and he is working on filling a bag of pellets that is going to go to a nearby assisted living facility to supply their pellet boiler. And so these actually, the Stones property and then the logger that did the logging on their property took those logs, brought that material to Chris Brooks at Vermont Wood Pellet Company. They're turning that into pellets that is going to a nearby facility. And so there's a really very great story to tell. Not only is it a good local economic story, but it's a great wildlife story. I mean, so these are just examples of the kinds of birds that will benefit from that log job. It may not be overnight, but over time, those birds are really going to benefit from the work that was done on their property. And that's something they want to feel proud about. because they really do want to manage their property for wildlife. And so there are people in this industry that are helping them to do that. So that's a very powerful story for people. So just quickly, I'm going to share with you a few ways of how you do this, how you tell these stories. And so you can do it in a few different ways. So there's sort of that traditional quote-unquote earned media that you can use. So this is just an example. I did an op-ed a few months ago to talk about the industry. And so we pitched this op-ed, and it ran in a few different places. I think this one's Vermont Digger, and I think it ran in a few other local publications. But earned media just simply means, you pitch a story idea or an op-ed, and perhaps a paper or a publication or a broadcast station might pick it up. There's no guarantee that they will, but that quote-unquote earned media is essentially, you're not paying for it, but you also don't totally control whether it happens or not. But today, we have a lot more options. So owned media, all of you in this room have the opportunity to utilize your own owned media, so your website, or your social channels, where you can just tell your own story and build an audience for those stories. And so this becomes a very powerful tool. And so this is an example where we put Colleen's story up on our website, and that story, we pushed it out on social media, and it drew a lot of people to our website to read this story and then learn more about the industry. So you all can be doing this in your business, or if you're with a trade organization, you can be helping other members of your trade organization be doing this in their own business. And then finally, of course, social media. So this is just a screenshot of our Facebook page. We did a story about a company that makes maple products in Morrisville, and Butternut Mountain Farm. And so, it was another great story that we were able to tell. And on social media, we pushed this out, and they pushed it out to their networks, and their networks, and their networks. And so this got several thousand views, and we didn't have to pay for a single part of it. We just kind of worked our networks to say, hey, share this story with your friends. And it goes far and wide. So this is, again, something that all of you can do if you have social channels, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever your social channel of choice might be. You can do this for very little, if no money. Just share your story and encourage your friends and your networks to share them with their friends and their networks. And then finally, paid media. So on some of our social posts, we do boost them, and essentially that just means that we're paying to make sure that they reach an audience in a certain area. And so we pick some geographic areas where we want the stories to be seen. And so unfortunately, it is sort of a pay-to-play world with Facebook these days in particular. It's a large social channel, and they do want to monetize that. So, but the good news is you don't have to spend a lot. You could literally spend about $5, and you can get your stories out further and wider than you could if you just used your own organic, networks of your own. So those were some examples of the stories. The goals of this project that we're doing, this communications campaign essentially, is really to try to connect the public to the primary side of the industry through engaging profile stories. So again, the people and the businesses throughout the sectors to truly try to help people to understand who they are, that they're real people doing really wonderful work, and that there's a lot of benefit to what they do from an economic, social, and environmental all of those ways. And also to challenge some of those negative perceptions that might exist about the forest products industry. When I first started into this, the stories that you read, if you were to Google stories about the industry, often the things that will come up are things that have to do with conflict. So somebody doesn't like logging on state land, and so then there becomes a big hubbub. And poor Mike in the back of the room, I see you nodding your head. Yeah, you have to deal with that all the time. And so those conflict stories tend to get press. And having been a reporter, I can tell you it is what will lead the day, unfortunately, for traditional news media. They're gonna look for the conflict. It's quote unquote more interesting for their readers. I personally believe that we need to counter some of that with positive stories. So balance out the times that people will read stories that something bad happened in the industry, so much more good happens in the industry, and yet nobody's telling those stories. We've got to tell those stories. So really the goals of this project are to help tell more of those stories to balance out the coverage of the industry and hopefully get people to understand it better so that there are fewer and fewer conflicts. So just a few quick stats this spring. We published 9 articles between March and June. They've so far been read by more than 6,000 people on our website. That doesn't include everybody else's website, because I know like the FPA and some of the others have been putting them on their own websites, which is wonderful. But we've reached more than 300,000 people on social media, and people have liked, shared, or commented more than 1,600 times. So for 9 stories, those are pretty good numbers. I mean, I'm pretty pleased with that. We've also gotten some earned media pickup, and so if we think about how many potential eyeballs go on those, we've got about 200,000 additional readers. We have gotten, so we did one on Green Mountain Grain and Barrel, and that was on the front page of the St. Albans Messenger, because one of the co-owners is from St. Albans. Vermont Business Magazine loves these stories, so FYI, if you've got a good story to tell, chances are they will pick up your story, and that's a great outlet for any kind of business. And several local newspapers have picked up some of these stories. The good and bad about the journalism world shrinking is that there is less and less capacity to cover industries like ours. But the good news is if you spoon feed them really good stuff, and particularly if you have good art, oftentimes they will be glad to take it. So take advantage of that. So it's just a few more. We've had a lot of great, the Kingdom Trails, I mean, they shared our story about loggers, mountain bikers in a tiki bar. That has gone just gangbusters. I think Northern Forest Center, you guys have shared it, and many others have. And so, that's helpful because you've got a big network at Northern Forest Center. And so the more we can all start to share our stories, it goes out further and further, and that bubble becomes bigger, and that's what we want. So lastly, I just want to encourage you all to think that every story really has a protagonist and a hero, and you really are the hero of your story. So think about it in that way. You're managing your forest, you're closely monitoring, checking, cultivating your woods, you're tending your garden. Mike Snyder uses that, and I'm stealing it because I love it. I think it's a really good analogy, especially for the gardening community. They get that, and there really are some similarities there. Well, you're a caretaker, you're a teacher, you're a nurse. I mean, you're all of those things when you're caring for our forests. So you really are the hero of your story. And with that, I will turn it over to Maura.
That's such a nice way to finish. You are the hero of your story. I love it. All right, this is a really kind of dovetails nicely with what Christina was talking about, because this is going deeper into one sector having to do with automated wood heat, or wood pellet boilers. I don't know if anyone went to the session on that earlier, but it's, as opposed to wood stoves or pellet stoves, we're talking about the systems that can heat a whole house or a whole school, any other kind of building without people getting involved. So just to reinforce, that's the kind of technology that we're going to be talking about, that this marketing campaign is working on. But basically, we're going to talk about how landowners and homeowners and schools are getting stoked about automated wood heat, that's part of this marketing campaign that we developed. So as I said, the Northern Forest Center is a nonprofit working across this 30 million acre region. And our programs have to do with community forests. We help wood products manufacturers, working with outdoor rec, doing sort of direct community revitalization, and promoting the use of automated wood heat. And that's so important here because, as all of you know, this is a highly heating oil dependent region. $4 billion or more leaves the region every year spent on heating oil. And being able to retain that here is an incredibly important way to support our communities. And this is nothing that's unfamiliar to you guys, but just setting some context for why we do the work. There are plenty of good wood pellet and chip installations across the region. This is commercial scale only. You know, compared to the number of oil and propane boilers, it's minuscule. But there are great examples we can point to. Here's a couple that we've supported. We got the New Hampshire U.S. Senator Jean Shaheen to come to a ribbon cutting for a pellet boiler installation at an affordable housing complex a couple of years ago. We have about 125 homeowners that we've given incentives to at this point, and they love their boilers so much that they send us pictures. You see a sense of connection to heating this way that you don't necessarily see when people are heating with oil. We've had a good success getting some traction on good stories. So this woman on the left is Kate Butler up in Craftsbury. She had heated with wood her whole life. She felt a great connection to the forest through firewood. She was getting older, didn't want to cut and carry wood anymore, but a wood pellet boiler let her still heat with wood, even though she couldn't do that anymore. The local news likes talking about this. It's still a fairly novel technology. We have town halls all across the 4 states heating this way. There's Phil Scott announcing a grant to Warren's Energy, helping them develop their bulk wood pellet delivery. So there's a lot of good things happening in this sector. We have evidence that it's beneficial. So this is just from the work that we've been doing since 2012, giving incentives and technical assistance for 162 boilers at this point at commercial and residential scales. And we estimate, based on actual pellets delivered, that people have spent $1.6 million on pellets made in the northern forests, that we've reduced greenhouse gases by almost 4,000 tons, and that it's had a total economic impact of $3.3 million. And that's just from those 162. So we can look at actual numbers, but as Christine said, numbers are fine, and they sound big and impressive, but who are those people buying the pellets? Who are those people making the pellets? What does that total economic impact look like in a community? So there's all these challenges kind of circling, that we have these great examples, and yet this is still a pretty boutique technology that not a lot of people know about. So when you talk about an automated wood pellet boiler, people automatically go to pellet stove. And these are still not very well known at all. And even though in most of the northern forest you can get bulk pellets delivered, you can find an example pretty near you, it's not in the public consciousness. Oil has been pretty inexpensive for the past few years, so people haven't felt a sense of urgency to switch off fossil fuels. These systems tend to have a pretty high capital cost, so there are state incentives that make it more doable, but it's not easy to pull your checkbook out and spend more than you could just buying another propane system. And, you know, as Christine kind of got into, there's misconceptions about the impact and questions about, well, is this really renewable? What is the carbon impact? Are we going to cut down all our trees, et cetera? So we have this tension between a great technology and lots of good examples, and it's not yet getting the traction we need. And so as an organization, we invested in the 162 installations, and the idea was, and to some extent has worked, those have served to be good demonstration projects and capture attention and motivate some people in those areas to install systems too. But it wasn't having the really broad ripple effect that we need to get these systems to be common and ordinary, for this to be a mainstream heating option. And so a couple of years ago now, we started talking with more people in the industry about, because everyone was experiencing this, and everyone was lamenting this at the conferences and at events, and we're all saying, oh, if only oil were more expensive, and oh, if only people knew more, and all just kind of reiterating these same challenges. And we said, well, what do we need? What are we doing? What do we need to do differently? And realized that we needed to start talking together in a different way about this technology, appealing to people's emotions, and really just developing kind of a traditional marketing campaign to create automated wood heat as a category. So there's having to distinguish it from other kinds of wood heat. Automated, we did a lot of surveys and focus groups and worked with a couple different consultants trying to put this all together, and all came down to kind of the similar point that people don't know what we're talking about. We need to simplify it. We need to establish this heating option in the public consciousness so that when someone does need a new heating system, they know that this is an option. So what this represents is a level of cooperation across the automated wood heat sector that hadn't been there before. People had been promoting their boiler or their pellets. And when people don't even know that this option exists, they don't care whether it's a Furling or an Okafen. They're like, well, what is that? They don't even know that a wood pellet boiler exists. So how do we elevate the idea of heating this way before we start getting into the details of different types of equipment? So there started to be cooperation that we hadn't seen before. And again, the real fundamental goal is to raise awareness. It's not even necessarily to immediately drive sales, because seeing some ads is not going to say, oh, I'm going to go out and buy a new fancy boiler right now. But having that idea in your head that this exists, this is possible, will make you pause when you do need a new heating system, or when your school is expanding, or anything like that. You know it's there. Similar to what Christine was saying, we realized through all these conversations that we have to make a values-based case. That the people involved in this tend to be very rational and tend to focus on technical things and tend to focus on the engineering of systems. And that is not speaking to the consumer. What speaks to the consumer is, how do you feel? How do you feel about how you heat? Does this make you feel good? And that's where we came into this idea of feel good heat as one of the ways that we're talking about this campaign. So using this cooperation between the industry, wanting to get to greater awareness and making a values-based argument, we, with this really wonderful team that we had hired, coming up with a new creative approach to tell the story about it that I'll get into in a minute. But to the cooperation point, we had kind of a really wonderfully diverse group of people who were advising this process over a couple of years. So environmental groups, state agencies, private companies. It was really a nice way for people to talk and support each other. Last March, we launched FeelGoodHeatorg, which is intended to be a one place where people can go to just get good, simple information about automated wood heat. That lots of websites had stuff about it, but we all tended to go on too long explaining all the details and all these technical things. And what our design team kept reiterating is, people don't need to know that. They just need to get the basics. They need to get excited. They need to start feeling connected to this. And from the website, they can get to the experts who can then drill into all the details, but get them just baseline familiar with it and start getting them excited. So one of the things on the website is these stories, to Christine's point, about some of the people that are involved in the automated wood heat supply chain. And we talk about how these people are stoked about automated wood heat. So this is Doug Beck. He's the president of New Hampshire Audubon, which has been heating with the wood pellet boiler for 7 or 8 or 9 years now. He loves it. He sees it as totally consistent with their environmental mission. Then we have, you can go and read more about that case and why they're stoked about it. We did a photo shoot at Chris Brooks' pellet mill. The mill workers are stoked. So then we talk about, here's what happens in the mill, and here's the people behind it. Here's one of the stories we talk about, some landowners that, to Christine's point, the vast majority of people do not know what forest harvests look like. They know very little about it. I was talking to a woman for the Upper Valley, and she was like, I'm just so disappointed by my neighbor. They were cutting down all these trees and they weren't even replanting any. You don't need to replant trees in New England. You look around, there's stone walls and there's trees. Trees grow back here. So they don't, and not to fault them, because what you don't know, but the point being, there's a lot of education to do about people's stewardship for the land, reinforcing that the people who are cutting trees love their land. And we absolutely need to be telling that story more. So this is just one way that we're trying to get that across. Another is that we wanted to show people how this works. And what is the journey from the forest to the home? So we put together a little video. smile every time. So the goal there, again, is just to talk about, just show people what is this thing, to capture their imagination.
Website. I've already done it with Wix.
You gotta turn off the...
Let's go to Wix.com. There are loads of absurdly gorgeous people.
Capture people's imagination, capture their interest, and make this more accessible and interesting than like me talking about, oh, and then this is how you make a pellet, da, da, da. That can come later. This captures attention. So we do get into some very simple distinctions between why you should be choosing wood pellets and what are the benefits, of course. So getting a little bit more Q&A-ish on the website, because there are all these very good, real questions that people want answered. So it's not all just touchy-feely. We do want to make the case. And the greatest distinction we make is opting out of oil. So we're not saying you shouldn't use wood stoves, you shouldn't use pellet stoves. It's really about let's get out of using fossil fuels. So emphasizing the community benefits, the economic benefits, safety, job growth here at home, and greenhouse gas emissions. So where we are now is, like I said, the website came out in March, and we have been running some digital ads since then in all 4 of the Northern Forest states, and getting a lot of different supporters on board. So we can only do so much by like buying some digital ads and doing this as one small organization. It takes a lot of people. You saw that list of collaborators earlier on, buying into this and using the materials in their circles. So we want to see the wood pellet vendors having the logo on their trucks and wearing the automated wood heat t-shirt while they're in somebody's basement. And we want to see at the corner store little bookmarks with information about automated wood heat on them. And we want to see people, local organizations and town energy committees having parties at in somebody's basement to celebrate their new pellet boiler. And in the advertisements for that, have the logo, have the look, have the feel, so that people start seeing it in different places and it starts becoming normal. So the supporters, when you sign on to be part of Feel Good Heat, it's participating in this important campaign that goes across different sectors. So it's environmental groups and companies and towns and nonprofits all coming together around this campaign. It gives people clear messages on wood heat. So it's simple and quick ways to talk about wood heat and answer those difficult questions that we didn't feel like we had access to before. That when you go to professional design and marketing people, they know how to talk about things in a clearer way because we've been doing it too much, and they come at it with a different voice and a different angle that's really effective. There's a benefit to being affiliated with like-minded organizations. We have gotten a lot of, it's really beneficial, especially to have the environmental organizations on board. So Vermont Natural Resources Council, New Hampshire Audubon, their endorsement as Feel Good Heat supporters goes a long way. And we're giving people a web presence and publicity, including these paid ads, having people able to go onto our social media feed. So being part of the campaign, it's free. There's no cost to it. But we are just looking for a wide variety of supporters and participants. So I would encourage all of you to do that. The only agreement that you would make is help inform your constituencies, whether it's clients, fellow people in town, the people in your social media networks, etc. So I don't have the handout with me, but there's a lot of different suggestions about what that means. And then you'll get access to all the graphics. There's access to the movie. There's a movie theater in Lancaster, New Hampshire that's going to be playing the movie with captions before shows. We're going to have t-shirts and bumper stickers and whatnot in the very near future. So we're encouraging all the supporters and participants to use those things to show support and to help, again, get that message out. These are some early examples of what we thought the stuff might look like. There's been some changes. This is an example of, an early example of what the digital ads looked like, and they did a lot of tests around which of the images and which of the slices of the video performed best on Facebook, which is super interesting. But that's the way we've been talking about wood heat and trying to push it lately. More stories to tell. The kids in the Burke Town School just down the road are so excited about their pellet boiler. We got them all outside. I think they just wanted to go outside instead of being in class, but whatever. So I want to give credit also to the Vermont Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, one of the funders for this, and really interested in hearing your thoughts and questions. But maybe at this point I'll turn it over to Kathleen for conversing. Huh?
Sure, well, we can certainly have questions. I want to just verify, if organizations want to share their information, they can find that on your website.
They should come to me.
Come to you.
And
okay.
we have, it's like a very simple agreement. And I should say, we do have a little executive committee that reviews. So when somebody wants to join it, there are some very basic criteria, but we do review it so that somebody selling some shoddy equipment can't just grab this and go off and run with it and give the brand a bad name. So we do pay attention to like who's coming on board and have a process for if you're misusing it, or if you start selling something that then turns out to be awful, or do something really bad to customers, we can remove you. So there's a process to like keep this, keep it a good, meaningful brand.
And so if I want to have access for Vermont Woodlands Association,
Come to
I'm
me.
just going to talk to you.
Yes.
How do people get in touch with you?
My email address is up there,
Email's up there.
and I have cards,
Okay.
and I will be here afterward.
Thank you. Because I think there is a lot that we can do to help spread
Yes.
that message, for sure. And your video distribution, how does that work? I mean, where do you have that?
The video's on the website.
It's on the website? Okay, and so that's something we can show as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Great. This is not, oh, yes, it is. Okay, I just had to get closer. I just heard so many things that rang true for me. And I've been thinking about these things forever, and listening to people, I think, is so important because we need to meet them where they are when we want to talk to them about what's important to us. And understanding what their obstacles might be, understanding what their perceptions might be, and we really do need to listen to know what our message needs to be to get over those obstacles. And I think that we have so much opportunity to be more proactive, which I think would eliminate our need to be reactive. So there's just so much that we can do. Now, Christine mentioned the Habitat for Heat. I don't know if you mentioned it by name, but the project in southern Vermont with the Stone family, and that was part of our woods, wildlife, and warblers. And that really was a case of developing that program after listening to about 100 people around the state of Vermont and what was important to them, and specifically related to the tree farm program. And are we doing okay at the status quo, or is there something else we need to do? And what we heard from everybody was we need to increase the number of people caring for their forests. How are we going to do that? We're going to meet them where they are. What are the things they care about? They care about wildlife and birds. And so the program was built around that notion that you can talk to people about things through that channel that they're really going to listen to. And so when you go to them with their love for wildlife and birds, you can get to the point of saying, and by the way, did you know, there is a way, if we listen hard enough to what people have to say, to meet them where they're at and make some real progress. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
Mara, am I correct that when automated wood heat, that when the power goes out, it's like a wood stove that keeps running because you have battery backup?
You can have a battery backup. And if you don't have battery backup, just like an oil or propane, it'll go out.
Because I feel like that's one of the emotional appeals of wood heat, if you've got a wood stove, is that when the power goes out, so what? We still got heat. And that could be used to help, widen the
If they
field.
did stay on when the
What's
power
that?
goes, if they did stay on when the power goes out, but they do not, unless you have a generator backup.
You can't. A battery's not strong enough to keep the augers going. You need the generator.
I don't know.
You get
I know.
a Tesla battery.
That's the battery.
But it does not have that automatic advantage of a wood stove.
Yeah. Okay.
But so this is really, we do have a lot of people who are switching to this from a wood stove, but it is that you can make the best case for it when you're switching from oil or propane. When this is the greatest benefits are when you're making that transition.
There's a company in Randolph that,
Would you tell us who you are, please?
my name is Bill Sayre, Kathleen. There's a company in Randolph that's developing LED technology that produces light from heat. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're working on another project that would produce electricity or charge a battery from heat if they can create light. So I think there's technology coming. But you're right, that's an issue if the pellet stops running, if the power goes up, we got to figure that one out.
Other questions from the audience?
Andrew Rainville from Maple Landmark in Middlebury. So we're a wooden toy game and gift manufacturer, and so one of the things that was talked about a lot here was making sure that you tell the story and less of the numbers and more of the emotion. And that's something that we've been trying to do a lot as we go along, even to the point of earlier this year we conducted a survey of the stores that we sell to, saying, what are the most important values to you that we should be pushing? Because if it's important to you, it's probably important to your customers as well. And one of the things that rose to the top of that was Made in USA, because all of our stuff is made in Middlebury. And that's something that we do push a lot. And it can get very tiring from our end because we're saying the same thing over and over and over. And so it's very, very easy to get story fatigue because you're giving people the same content, including our family story, because it's a family business. We're pushing that one a lot too. Same deal. So I was kind of wondering from you guys if you had any thoughts in terms of how to deal with story fatigue, saying the same thing over again, trying to keep it fresh, bring in new ideas. Any thoughts on that?
I do have some thoughts on that. That's a really good question.
There we go. It's a really good question, and I do. So Marketing 101 is you really have to reach people multiple times with essentially the same message. So if you think about some of the best marketers out there, whether it's some of the large chain stores that you might frequent, or other brands that you're, Nike or some of the big, huge brands, they will find you, whether it's from, on your television set, on your computer, on your handheld device, in print ads, and essentially it might be the same exact ad, or maybe it's a nuance different, but essentially their strategy is, I'm going to find Andrew in every way possible with whatever campaign it is or product I'm pushing this month or whatever. And so that is, even though for the people doing it, it does get tiring. It gets like, really? You still don't know what this is? Come on, automated, what do you eat? But you just have to remember that people out there, they're getting messages hit at them, and we all are. It's not them, it's all of us. We are being advertised at and marketed at all the time. And so
it's even more important that you find different avenues to get to people, and you could tell a slightly different story. So you have your family story, but there's also the stories of the people who work for Maple Landmark, and they all have really interesting stories, and so maybe it's somebody who works out in your shop, or somebody in the warehouse, or somebody even your accounting office. They all have a real human story and can connect, and they all have a motivation for why they do what they do. And probably, if they're long-term employees, it's probably because they love working for this company. So they're great brand ambassadors for you. So you can tell different stories, but you're getting the same idea across to people, which is, hey, we are a family-run business. We support a lot of local jobs in our community. We are making these products here in America, here in Vermont. So there's ways in which you reinforce your message. So it's essentially the same message, but just with different stories about people who can help you share that message, and different channels that you reach people at.
Maybe different messengers, too, is what you're talking about, Christina. Because I think that the public also has that message fatigue. We get tired of telling the story, but I think that the public is so inundated with advertising that they get tired of hearing it. And so it's really incumbent upon us to find new ways to reach them, new stories, new ways to deliver messages and messengers.
Well, and I think the best advertising doesn't feel like advertising. Like when it's a feel-good story that you want to read and that you feel positive about, that goes a long way. And there is not enough good news and positive stories out there. So if your advertising can provide that, people will feel very pleased.
And I love that aspect of your Feel Good Heat campaign, because I think things like that, people see that and their reaction can be so different. It can mean so many different things that you capture a lot of audiences. Does it feel good that it's really warm in your house? Does it make you feel good because you've done something good? There are so many different messages. It's like the local wood, local good. I think that means so many different things to so many people. And the more we promote that, the better we're going to be at capturing different audiences, because it means something different to different people.
I'm going to go to a more difficult place because that's who I am. I think that positive messaging and feeling good is going to get us a certain amount to where we need to go. But when I think about what I'm hearing from the sawmills and the foresters in our region about the amount of forestry that's needed, about the amount of lousy wood that needs to get pulled out to conduct a level of stewardship that's really needed to have healthy forests, and the amount of opportunity that creates, I know that it will generate conflict that's beyond this level of messaging. And I think we have to start where we are, and I think this is exactly where we are as a state. But I think that the reality is, if tomorrow I could have a CLT or some other kind of factory that would provide an outlet for the wood products that we need an outlet for in order to have the kind of forestry we want to have, the pushback would be so ugly because of ignorance, because there aren't enough people who understand what healthy and productive looks like. And that's, I'm worrying 5 and 10 years down the road. Like, when do we get, or how do we get to the place where more people understand, that not having billboards doesn't make for healthy? Like, that's awesome, but that's superficial. And I think about being at the hearing for the S101, early in the year, and all of the foresters were standing around talking about like that horrible movie, that was talking about, basically, that the harvest of wood is an apocalypse. So I would love to just hear, I know that you would deal with this and you hear this and you're kind of starting where we need to be, but I would just love to hear sort of about, how can we unpack that a little bit?
How can we create some language to educate communities incrementally about, what are the practices that are actually healthy and productive? Oh, hi, I'm Jen Stromston. I work for the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation in Brattleboro.
I'll take a crack at that.
So I think there are a couple ways to address that. So one is, I gave you examples of some of the types of stories that we're trying to tell, but this campaign isn't, you know, when we conclude, this first phase will conclude at the end of August. Our hope is that we're going to continue this, and this becomes the norm, that part of the work that we all do, and I use we because really everyone in this room and everyone who's part of this network can be a part of helping to tell these stories. Because there are so many, this needs to be consistent over time, so that there will be, you know, whether it's a large plant going in that somebody might have concerns about, or if it's a logging job that's in a prominent location and so people are uncomfortable with that because they don't understand it, there's always going to be that challenge. But what we can do is A, counter some of that with positive stories so that people start to understand who the people are that are behind this work and understand the benefits of it. So that's the point of the stories that we're trying to tell. But then also, I think it goes even deeper in communities, and particularly so in Brattleboro, if you're sort of foreseeing the need in 5 or 10 years, or probably before that, you know, right now, right, to start getting people comfortable with the idea of, let's just say, a CLT plant. What you could be doing now is pulling together people in the community who have something to do with the potential industry and or the benefits, the jobs that might be brought in, and getting them comfortable with it. And then building out the network of people who can start to talk amongst themselves. I mean, this isn't something that one organization or one person or one business can do on their own. It really does take all of us together trying to talk about the benefits of whether it's a company, whether it's a process, and tying it back to the benefits to the community. So that has to almost become a mantra. So if you're foreseeing in 5 years you're going to have this, by the time that 5-year mark comes, people are already comfortable with this idea. They understand the benefit to your community. And that's going to come from a combination of community action and community gatherings that will help people to start to understand it. And then also probably an outward-facing strategy, communication strategy, that really starts to get the word out and just gets people more comfortable. But it is a sustained, over time sort of effort.
Yeah, I would say similar to that, getting people out in the woods and seeing foresters explain a log job and explain what's going on, and taking them to active logging sites saying like, yeah, this looks pretty destructive and scary right now. Those are really big machines. And go to a place that's been logged a year ago or 5 years ago, and this is the regrowth. We're talking to foresters who are doing a really good job of, you know, protecting the landscape as they go through doing a selective harvest, something like that, to get people to understand it, just see it and feel it, and be very transparent about what the impacts are now in the immediate and the shorter and longer term, so they don't, so you don't gloss over the impact. But like, yeah, having a CLT plant will increase the amount of logging in this area, and it's needed, and this is why, and have people who are immersed in that explain why, and get a little bit into the ecology of it. Have a party. Just have a picnic in the woods and get people to come to go for a walk.
And that's an approach that Vermont Woodlands uses a lot, a walk in the woods, to get people into the woods and talk to them and show them what's happening. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities. This is clearly not easy to do because people don't understand, and it is about education. You know, I'm reminded of a couple I met a few years back. We used to have a fine furniture festival. For the first time, we won't have it this year, but I met a couple about 4 years ago who came and they chatted with me and said, oh, we come here every year. We just love this wood furniture. You guys are so talented, yada, yada, yada. And then the next topic was their tirade about the log trucks that were going by their house. So, I mean, that's it. I mean, that is the disconnect in the real world. And we need to be able to navigate that disconnect, to take those opportunities and kind of give people a different way to look at those log trucks. You know, let's go back to that furniture you really love. Could you tell me where that wood came from? Do you know how it got to that factory where they made that table? Yeah, they don't, and so that is the opportunity. And if we're all, I mean, I guess I always think about what I'm doing and challenge myself to take advantage of more opportunities. You know, what are the things that I read where I can make a difference, or what do I watch, or what do I listen to, or where do I go and who do I see, and what kind of opportunities come up in all of those situations where I can take advantage of even 20 seconds to tell a little story to somebody who might be willing to listen, you know. What are your ideas about what we can do and where we can tell these stories? Anything come to mind? Any ideas you hadn't considered before? I think about our town reports in Vermont. Every town puts out a town report, and every property owner gets that and reads it. We could use that as a vehicle for putting out messages. I mean, I did my town report for years, you know. We're always looking for information. Our weekly newspapers are always hungry for information. Let's use some of those in the best way we can. I mean, there are places that we can get messages out. And Front Porch Forum, yeah, thank you. That's a good idea too.
I have another suggestion, and it just came to me as Kathleen was talking. She reminded me. So Craig Rawlings, who you all heard this morning, so with the Forest Business Network, they do the International Mass Timber Conference. And so this past year, there was a group that wanted to come and protest because they were concerned about CLT. And so you would think that Craig and his team would be like, oh no, we've got protesters, we're gonna be out front of our building, oh, this is gonna be horrible. You wanna know what they did? They invited them. They said, come on, free access to the conference, come on the tours with us. You're gonna come see some of these places, you're gonna see some of the buildings, you're gonna see a plant that's going up. We want you to understand it so that when you're protesting, and Craig said, feel free to protest. If that's how you feel, then continue your protest, but only if you come and join us at the conference. You wanna know what? I think 2 people ended up protesting, and it was like a nothing burger. I mean, they had planned a big protest, but because Craig and his team really took the tact of, we're not gonna fight you on this, you have your opinion, that's fine, but come understand ours. And that really is very effective. And I was very impressed with the way they handled that, because, we were all worried, like, oh great, we're gonna have to walk through a protest line to go to our conference. And it ended up totally fine, and these people came in, and honestly, I bet there will be no protests next time. Because now they're starting to understand, and they realize, again, we're all human. We can disagree. We can disagree on what's best for our communities, but we can do it in a civilized way, and if somebody wants to protest, that's fine, but let's bring them into the fold and help them to understand before we put up our dukes and start fighting.
And that's about meeting people where they are, whether they agree with you or not.
I wanted to ask a question to you all in the room, and I see a couple foresters in the room. So one of the things that came out of our survey, we did ask some questions about wood heat specifically. We wanted to know what people felt and thought about wood heat in their life. And one of the questions we asked is, who do you trust the most when it comes to thinking about heating your home with wood? And aside from neighbors who do it, the second most popular, most trusted source was a forester. So I would be curious to know from any of the foresters in the room, how often you talk to your neighbors or friends about how they heat their homes, and if they would consider something like an automated wood heat system, or if Maura and the team gave foresters more information about this technology, how comfortable would foresters feel about being, in a sense, advocates or ambassadors for this kind of technology? And I'm kind of looking at Rob over there, because I know you're a forester and that you have an opinion.
I'll stand up just to stretch a little bit. Probably don't even need the microphone. But yeah, I talk to people about wood and wood heat and use of wood and things like that all the time. And so.
What's the reaction that you get? What's the?
Well, it's usually people are asking me. You know, I mean, I have plenty of things to evangelize about instead of wood heat, just active forest management, for example. But I mean, people are always asking me things about wood heat, especially.
So how comfortable would you be with, if you had more of the information about automated wood heat, would you want to get more involved and try to help people be introduced to that as a technology?
Yeah, that's reasonable, and I've learned a lot at the conference here, and just, the idea, well, the difference between a pellet stove and an automated system of boiler and furnace, and just kind of adding the labels to it is always helpful.
Thank you. Charlie, do you want to respond to that?
I'm fairly hands-on with culture forester. Yeah, I agree with Otto. I mean, I think that any option or opportunity we have to talk to the landowners about wood heat or anything else is a good one. Wood heat, automated wood heat is awesome, and I'm all for it. I also go back to just clarity. I mean, one of the best tools that I have for explaining forest management is when someone gets 2 cords of wood delivered and they go, what the heck is the blue paint doing on my wood? And that's the end to talk about forest management. And so I think any opportunity we have to talk about where the wood comes from and why is a good one. So I'm all for it.
Anybody else? Now, I always think about signage too. I love the opportunity to interpret things, and I think there's a chance for us to interpret the landscape a whole lot more than we do. Do you, as a forester, do you ever put up signs that explain what you're doing so that when people ride by, they can see that and even call you if they have a question?
Yeah, we put up signs on high visibility projects, and you can just, like, my printer doesn't do 11 by 17, but if I print out and I can blow it up on my photocopier to 11 by 17 on cardstock and just like staple it to a tree. We do a lot of work around Woodstock, and there are all these horse trails that go through. And so you got people riding on horses, and then there's a logging operation. And these trails, I mean, there's like 100 miles of trails around there. So putting up a sign, just, people don't realize that there's all this thought process that goes into the logging in New England, and that it's not just loggers are cut loose to take whatever they want. And when they see, even with fairly drastic cuts, if they see that there's some kind of a thought process to it, it's like the lights go on. And along those lines, I've been involved in public education for a long time, and one of the things that I've found extremely useful, and many people in this room have seen it, I lug these tree cookies around that I show off. And so I've got these 2 tree cookies. They're both just over 2 feet in diameter, and one is a 300-year-old hemlock tree. And it shows slow and fast growth over decades of time. The other one's a red oak. It's a little bit bigger, and it's 50 years old. Steady, uniform growth. But the main point is that the weather has nothing to do with the growth rate of trees in New England. And people have this idea that the rainfall, weather, climate, whatever, that affects the growth rate of trees, and it's all about crowding in the forest. When the forest is crowded, the growth rate slows down. And that's the lead into all these other discussions about forest management. So, we all engage with people all the time. There's always an opportunity to tell these stories.
So do you think it would be helpful if there were a source of signage for logging jobs that you could, just like on those lawn signs that people put up when they're running for office, if they were available to put in the ground on those stakes or to nail to a tree?
There are a bunch of signs that are available, and like from forestry suppliers or Bed Meadows or whatever, prepared signs you can get, vinyl signs, and they say managed area or wildlife habitat area, or things like that. We just make up our own because there's usually something specific to say, like this forest was abandoned farmland in 1932 and was planted to red pine in 1936, and we're harvesting red pine to make telephone poles and lumber, and it's going to go back to native harvest. So the specific story is helpful.
Any other comments or questions? Rachel? I can just go down over there.
Hi, I'm Rachel Fallon. I'm working for the Vermont Woodlands Association this summer. And I'm actually working on marketing and outreach. And it just occurred to me, looking at the kids out here, if there's been any work maybe trying to publicize this kind of stuff and make with the new pellet heating systems to high schoolers or to middle schoolers that are interested in sustainability. Because I remember my first experience with this being tours going to different kinds of recycling plants or dump sites and getting that first experience, seeing that, and now a few years later having the opportunity to work off of that and see how that initial experience, I was inspired to, at the smaller scale, talk to my parents about it, talk to my family about it, kind of promote things like recycling. And so now looking at newer technology, maybe kind of spreading that to younger generations and kids that could potentially use this kind of new interest to push it along, and so not only get a younger generation involved, but then to maybe have them push the story to their parents and to older generations as well.
So we have not done a lot of that, other than when we put money toward a school heating system. We've sometimes done open houses, organized that, and actually we had one at West Burke at this school, and one of the mothers who came on the tour decided to put one in her own house, and then some of you know Tabitha Bowling, so then she decided to very seriously pursue building a pellet mill, so success story. I think some places that have, some schools that have pellet boilers, there's faculty who are doing a good job of exposing kids to it, and I think that's where, just given capacity of nonprofits like ours, it probably does have to come down to within the school. Like, again, at Burke, the facility manager has written a curriculum around the pellet boiler, and so I think that's on them, and those of us who are promoting this, whenever there is an installation in a school of any kind, we should be working with them to make sure they're prepared to do that. So that's a great reminder that I should be doing that more.
That's where a lot of social change happens, when kids bring those stories home to mom and dad, like smoking is bad. you can't just ignore your kids, or you need to recycle or whatever. And we have a whole audience there of messengers that I think we don't often talk to. Good point. Well, I think we are at, yes, at 3:29, a minute early. Is that okay, folks? Thank you so much, Christine and Maura. That was really enlightening. I appreciate all the comments and feedback from the audience as well. We've come a long ways, and we have a long ways to go. But it's exciting, and I think we're making progress. Thank you.
And just FYI, we'll be reconvening here at 3:45 for our closing panel, so feel free to go out and grab some water or coffee, and then come on back at 3:45. Thank you.